Well, welcome to the Rabbi and the Shrink. This is Margarita Gurri, the Dr. Red Shoe, and this is
Rabbi Yonason Goldson.
And we're delighted to have with us Claire Vande Polder. Claire, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're just impressed and delighted that we could have you. Claire is an amazing individual. She just finished a book, Making Marriage Happy, Hard-Won Wisdom from Real Couples. She is an expert in interviewing people, as you can see and in her book. She's also a nonfiction TV producer, award-winning professional. She's done National Geographic, Discovery Health, and all sorts of other stuff. I mean, she's just amazing. Smithsonian Channel, HGTV, which is the one I'm most impressed with. I mean, you know, I love HGTV. She's been all over. So we're delighted to have her and her point of view. So let's just start off with Claire Vande Polder. What possessed you to write this book about happy couples?
I know. What would have possessed me? Well, it occurred really after having spent some holidays, my husband and I, with some wonderful couples who we just had the most fun with, and started to talk about how different they were from us. And I think as a TV producer, you're always looking for a project, you're always looking for some sort of a story or something to dig into. And that's my producer's brain started to think about that. And I really thought I would love to interview couples about what they do in their lives that makes their marriages work. And I'd also love to talk to them about the things that they struggle with. And so I started to think about the best way to do that. And I hadn't written a book before, but I always kind of wanted to. So I thought, well, let's try this. And so I started by talking to couples that we knew, talking to friends and family, and just really to test the idea, and found out that they actually had some things in common. These very disparate couples had things in common that they did that they said contributed to their happiness. And then after that, I was referred to more and more people. So in the end, I talked to a very diverse group of couples. The youngest had been married for 4 years. The oldest had been married for 62.
Wow.
They were from all sorts of different cultures, gay and straight, different ages. And so what I came up with is a book that is basically what happy couples do as told in their own words. It's the only book I know of that's where all the expert advice comes from people who are only experts in their own relationship. And you know, what they do that makes them happy.
I think that's absolutely wonderful. Well, the Rabbi and I were talking about your book, and one of the things we talked about is that each of us had some thoughts about, you know, I'm more of the practical aspects of ethics, and the Rabbi is the theoretical. So I'm going to ask the Rabbi, what does being part of a happy couple have to do with ethics?
Well, in Jewish tradition, we see marriage as the model for developing a relationship with God. Because ultimately, what makes a successful relationship is each person looking to serve the other one's best interest. And the way we phrase it, when my spouse's happiness, when my happiness is dependent on my spouse being happy, that's a relationship that's functioning properly. And really, that's how we envision ethics. It's the awareness of our responsibility to others. Now, of course, part of that is our responsibility to ourselves. But the idea is that those go hand in hand. And there's a really, very briefly, there's a fascinating teaching of the sages that a person who dreams of a river, a kettle, or a bird will have a happy marriage.
What?
And, well, the commentaries explain that these are allegories for different types of relationships. So a river, think about in older times when commerce took place on the river. And so the river is an allegory for a transactional relationship, right? I get what I want, you get what you want. We're serving ourselves through the relationship. That's the lowest level on which a relationship can prosper. A kettle is taking two elements, water and fire, that don't work very well together, and bringing them together in a cooperative or collaborative effort. We can try to figure out who's the water and who's the fire, but that's a different discussion. But ultimately, what is a bird? A bird is a creature that flies and a creature that can function on the land. And each talent, each ability interferes to some degree with the other. And yet those two abilities are integrated into a single creature. And that's ultimately what marriage should be, where the husband and the wife see each other as two parts of a whole. Neither of us is complete without the other. It's not so much that just that we need each other, but we are each other. And if we can strive towards that ideal, then we are on the road to a happy marriage.
That's interesting. So Claire, you talked to how many couples?
I talked to around, I think, 46.
Wow. And how many were
married collectively? Sorry, they had been married collectively for 1,000 years at that point. I like to say it's 1,000 years of marriage wisdom.
I like it.
That's like the rabbi.
Yeah.
Well, that is amazing. So what is the secret? I mean, we talked about the river, the kettle, and the bird. I don't know if that jives with what you were talking about with your couples, but what is the secret to a happy couple?
I think it's a combination of things. One thing I would say, though, is the realization that happy doesn't mean perfect, and happy doesn't mean easy. And that these are people who are working at it every day. It's something that they've always got their eye on. You know, I think when I was a younger person, I looked at people who had been married for a while and I thought, okay, they're like on autopilot, right? They just do what they do. There's never any, you know, but as you know, we now know, of course, and you know, when you age beyond, you know, at a kind of an early age after college, everything is changing. And the world is changing around. You can try as you may to stay static, but you can't. And so you have this very dynamic process where both partners are changing all the time. The world around them is changing. You get news of, you know, something bad happens in the world or with your health or something, and there's all these new things to react to. And I think that one of the things I found that was very common to all of them is that they were really very aware of that, and that it was a daily job to stay with each other as much as possible, to try to grow together, because growing apart is what would happen naturally.
You know, one thing you said there that I think should be a meme and that we can all learn from and continuously learn from is that happy doesn't mean easy. Doctor, wouldn't you say that psychology, that's a pretty critical outlook?
Yeah, I think, you know, I did therapy for about 45 years. And one of the things we discovered is that if people understand that happiness is, as you say, Claire, not perfect and not easy, but it's also up to us. So as the rabbi was saying, that, you know, our mutual happiness, that we can't totally be happy if the other person isn't happy. There's some limits to that because some people are never happy, and that's a separate issue, but we'll address that. Some people love to collect injury and always be unhappy, or they're mentally so unwell that happiness somehow is not in their purview, right? So that's interesting. What are some of these suggestions in terms of couples do you make in terms of this day-to-day? How do we keep someone as a priority day-to-day in the midst of all these changes?
I think some of it goes to what the rabbi was saying earlier about looking at yourselves as a unit. And as much as these couples had very healthy senses of self and their own careers, their own interests, in many cases their own friends, they also were very aware that they have a team approach to life. and that they're better together. Actually, they're better and stronger together. There's a section in the book where people kind of list all the achievements they've been able to do, only that they would have done with the help of their partner. They run marathons or gotten another degree in school or changed jobs. They've been more ambitious overall. They've gotten more out of themselves. They've gotten more life out of life. And I think it's that sort of a realization that, like, this is my person, and everything I invest in that is just going to enhance my personal experience. So I think that that's one of the things that really came through, that the team, as much as you can keep yourself in a team mentality day to day, it's only going to benefit.
It's interesting in the biblical, the Hebrew word for love is connected to two roots. One root is give, because when you give, you become invested. When you become invested, that's when you feel connected, attached, and that's where feelings of love come from. In our society, there is so much emphasis on what's in it for me. It's not hard for us to understand why so many relationships struggle and often fail. But the other word it's connected to is the word for flame. And this is a really beautiful idea for a couple of reasons. One, a flame is the only thing you can give somebody without giving it up. I can light your candle. I still have my flame. And that's the way love works. But the other idea is the shape of the flame, is that it's broad at the base and it tapers to a point, so that when you have people who are far apart in terms of being different, as we say, opposites attract. We say the best partnerships are between people who are different from one another. But what brings us together is that sense of common purpose. We have the same outlooks, we have the same core values, we have the same interests, what we want to achieve in our lives and in our relationship. And so our differences now become a source of strength in helping us reach our common goal.
Well, I loved reading your book, Claire, because I got that sense that even people who are very different, even if they didn't fully understand their pareja, their couple, I believe that they felt, from what you're saying, that source of strength in that difference. And I thought that was fascinating. There was only one couple I thought that seemed to have some more sense of apartness. But I just thought it was just a timely book, because everyone's wanting to be part of a perfect couple without having to give. And so they have a flame, but they steal it. And they're not really giving themselves. They're not willing to change or sacrifice. And what was your favorite story, Claire, of an example of the sacrifice, the giving of the flame, and the sharing of it?
Oh, there's a whole chapter on gift giving. Yes, I like that one. Yeah, thanks. Which I wanted to dig into, because I hadn't really seen this covered, and it's can be a problem for so many couples, and even the happy couples would talk about some of the, their big hits and misses, and they become parts of your story, because there's just this burden of expectation sometimes with the gift if couples haven't sorted it out. And even if they had, and they decided, look, gifts aren't that big to us, but then they wanted to do something special, there was anxiety attached to it. You don't want it to be wrong. You only want it to be happy. And if it's not a happy gift, if it doesn't make them happy, then you're both going to feel so much worse. So there's all this risk attached to it, right? But one of my favorite stories is of a woman who told me about how she was born on Christmas. And so her expectations for her birthday were always very, very low, because it got all lumped in with Christmas, and it was just never anything that was special in her family. And so when she got married, that kind of carried over, that it just was kind of got lost in the shuffle. And so one year, completely unbeknownst to her, her husband sent her out for the day and had sold his antique car that he had had for years, bought her a piano, moved the piano into the house, sat at an entire room full of guests in this massive surprise party. And so she came home that day, not knowing anything was going on, expecting maybe a little something for her birthday, but just burst into tears because it was this so much more than she would ever be able to imagine. You know, the car is gone, the piano's there, the house is full of people, everyone knows it's her birthday and nobody's talking about Christmas. And she was just, you know, that, like, I get goosebumps telling her story and I wasn't even there, but it's just like that sort of thing, to me is very inspirational, that one person can feel this expression of love, but then what did he do and how did he do it and how can I do it myself is kind of what I hope people will take, because it is sort of worth the effort.
I love that story. I got goosies and a little teary. I think it helps to get ready to laugh and smile and cry a little bit reading your book. I wasn't schmaltzy, but some very touching passages there. Yeah, so that was very nice.
It's remarkable what we can do with some creativity. I'm curious, Claire, what would happen if the spouse planned something like that, and for whatever reason it fell flat? I thought I was doing something my wife would love, and it turns out it's not what she wanted. It's not what she likes. I got it completely wrong. How does each party take it from there?
Well, interestingly, there was a guy, it happened to be another husband, who tells this story that his wife had always wanted diamond earrings, and this meant something to her. And he knew it and just decided, okay, this year I'll take this on. But he started to shop for them and he didn't realize how expensive they were. And so he got some that were pretty modest, but he thought were still going to work, and gave them to his wife. And she was so disappointed. I don't know if she cried, but she was so disappointed, and he felt awful. And they were evidently like for a baby or a child. I mean, they were just not for a woman, the mother of his children. You know, it was one of those sorts of things. And so he talks about, he said, I had to go away for a while and think about how to make amends, because he felt in a way that he had kind of wronged her. It wasn't about the earrings, it was about honoring her. And it became this thing that he really wanted to do right. And so he went back out, and, you know, it was like, had to ask himself, can we afford to do this? Yes, we can. It was something that he was investing in his wife. He didn't personally think that it was worth it, but she did. So he wanted to honor that, and ended up buying her really nice earrings, and gave them to her at a party that he threw for her to celebrate some other occasion, I think, but just to really make a big point of celebrating her and hopefully getting it right. And he got it just right. So they're not all that dramatic. I think sometimes, you know, there's some disappointment, but they also have to laugh. I mean, if you tried, you know, you're always going to recognize if somebody tried. I think I've gotten my share of gifts I didn't like that much, and my husband and I are just like, yeah, we can take this back, you know. But otherwise, you're never going to try. And then there's actually one woman who said, I've had my husband take back so much stuff now, he doesn't really buy me anything, and I feel bad because I think I just wore him down.
Yeah, and that was kind of my point, is that sometimes we have to see past the gift itself to the intention behind it and celebrate that.
Yes. And that's worth celebrating. That, you know, even if half of it goes back because there's really nothing you want, or you would have asked for it, you know, that being thought of and having someone go to the effort for you is lovely. And a lot of people, I'm sure, have read this book, The 5 Love Languages. And that was mentioned a couple times by, I think it's made it into the book a couple times, mentioned multiple times by people.
Yeah, David Chapman.
I find that very useful.
Well, and we'll get to that, because I think sometimes people don't want gifts that are things, but they want an act of service, or they want affection, or a private party, or a public party, or I know one woman who was furious with her husband is he threw her a surprise party where she doesn't like surprises. Like me, she's a refugee. And one day I woke up and we were, whisked off to an airport and I never saw my home or my nanny or my dog again. I'm not a big fan of surprises.
Yeah.
And everyone knows that. But yet sometimes when people try and surprise me, I'm gracious because I know they're trying to. But I don't like surprises. They're hardwired in my brain as not safe, which is interesting.
Yeah, you got to know who you're dealing with.
You really do. And I think that you also have to remember, like what you were saying, that people are they're doing their best, they're trying. But if they're not listening, I think that is the issue.
Yeah.
So, Rabbi, what else theoretically? You and I were talking about lots of theoretical things about couples. Where do you want to go with this?
Well, your last point, I think, was very insightful. The listening in order to know, and everybody knows that the biblical to know in the biblical sense, right? And that's actually Adam knew his wife, and that is a literal translation, because again, in biblical Hebrew, knowledge is the means to achieve intimacy. And that physical intimacy is really only meaningful when it is the expression of emotional and psychological intimacy. And that intimacy can only be achieved through time, through an effort to understand, listening, as you said, Doctor, but listening to know. The more we understand each other, I mean, there are sad stories of couples who live their whole lives without really knowing each other at all. And that's not what marriage is meant to be. It's meant to be that I know what you're thinking and you know what I'm thinking, and we are so much aligned with one another while being individuals, while being distinct human beings. It's that commitment to know one another that ultimately creates the intimacy that makes a successful marriage.
So Claire, tell the audience, please, can you have a happy marriage when you're not aligned sexually?
Oh man, that might be beyond my pay grade.
No, but I think that the couple's wisdom, I mean, was there a couple that you met in your collection where they were certainly not in sync with each other, but somehow were they still happy? Is that a possibility?
I think that certainly there were people who talked about that in the context of aging, for example.
Yes.
Because, and again, with the theme of change, that changes over time. Your hormones change, your energy level changes. People have kids, they don't have any sleep. There's a whole bunch of things that are in play. And some said, some were quite wistful about the fact that the sexual part of their relationship used to be fun and effortless and just the ultimate kind of play and very connecting. And now it's like, well, my husband has sleep issues and I have to get up really early. And, there's a whole bunch of things that make that just not as easy as it used to be. And you have to sort of accept that and kind of keep working with each other where you're at. And some said, I wish there were more, but others were like, there's not more at this moment, but our pattern has been that we kind of ebb and flow in this area. And we're used to that as being one of our patterns, that it might not be perfect right now, but where there's a will, we can get it back. Maybe we have to wait till vacation, but we'll recapture it when we can.
Yeah, I think that the couples, like in your book, that are happy are willing to talk about what they want and what they're disappointed in. And Marilyn Volker is a sexologist. She's a psychologist who is into sex therapy. She and I worked with the military couples together, and she did something very detail-oriented, and I did a more brief called Playful Loving. How do you bring play back into a relationship? And some of that is sexual play. And some of it might not have to do very sexual, but most of it's in the mind, right? How do you invite playfulness in a marriage? And one of the things she said, I think your couples would agree with her, which is you have to make agreements. Let's say one couple's here in the continuum where they want sex every moment of every day, and the other one says never works, never's good. The differences aren't as important as how they address each other's need and desire. And there was one couple who I felt in your book was extremely playful and came up with some great solutions about talking about it, but not having to do it. If I wasn't so tired, I'd like this. If I wasn't so mad at you, I'd be doing this, you know, whatever. The idea of sharing the ideas without having to change each other or lie and say, you know, I'm mad at you, so I'm not in the mood, or I'm mad at you, but I'm in the mood. Let's go, baby. You know, whatever. You know, how do you manage that? So what is the secret your couples found in dealing with this sexual divide?
I think, you know, the word honesty really came to mind, and in what the rabbi was talking about earlier too, that whether it's sex or gifts or anything else, you have to kind of dare to be yourself 100% in it, whether it's your sex life or you don't like the way they empty the dishwasher. I mean, it is, you know, profound and mundane all over the place. And when, you know, you don't have to say everything, but try to be yourself and kind of trust that the other person can still love you. If you think differently, they can still love you. If you went to the movie and you hated it, and they loved it, and now you don't go to those movies together anymore. I mean, it's just like the more themselves they became, the more they told the truth, the more they got to be comfortable and just themselves in their homes, it seemed like the better it was. And accepting each other and trying to change each other were always fun conversations too, because these things are not, you know, it's not easy to live with another person. But the just deciding to be themselves in the presence of this other person fully, the more fully they did that, the better it got.
You're touching on something, Claire, that I think it really extends. I mean, you've already extended it beyond the bedroom to all the aspects of a relationship. You know, there's a cliche. They say that women get married hoping their husbands will change, and men get married hoping their wives won't change, and inevitably both are disappointed.
Yes.
Yep. And I think it speaks to, you know, we talk about the roots of evil, the root of all evil. The root of all unhappiness maybe is unreasonable expectations. And where do those expectations come from? Well, a lot of it's cultural. You know, we see romance in the movies, and we think that's supposed to be real life. We have visions in our mind. We know what things feel like when we first get married, and everything's exciting and fun. And then reality sets in. And over the years, age comes along, and we have to reevaluate and reassess. I mean, I think you've spoken to this already, but maybe just to expand it a little bit, you know, how can we temper our expectations and make them a little more reasonable, be a little more accommodating, so we're not setting ourselves up for disappointment?
I think one of the couple, you know, one of the themes again was this notion of accepting each other. And yes, of course, you can always work with the person. You can let your feelings be known that you wish things were one way and not fundamentally another way. But at a certain point, who you get is who you get. And they all sort of talked about that this was a realization they came around to, and it took a lot of time. Usually it took a lot of time before they understood that's not who my husband is. This thing that I really wish my wife was doing, that's really not who she is. So can I just lay off of that and let her be more who she is, and you know, not worry. And then take more of a look at like, what am I doing? How could I change myself? Could I change the way that I think about something, because I have more control over that, and just learn to love that they are or aren't a certain way, and that there are other things that we can share. So I think, that notion of wanting the expectation of wanting somebody to be something, and accepting that as much as you'd like it, maybe they aren't. Well, accept that and move on. And there's plenty of other things I'm sure to appreciate. And that's really where they chose to put their energy, are the things that I appreciate and that I love, and that that's the substance of that person, not the things that they didn't.
Which brings us to an issue that causes much grief in every relationship, which is emotional maturity. So one of the tenets of emotional maturity is facing reality and working with it in a flexible, productive way. That's one of the tenets of emotional maturity.
Yeah.
So, Rabbi, what are the ethics? If I'm married to somebody who is not at all flexible and insists that we both stay the way we were when we were young and dumb, is there any hope? And what is the whole point of being with someone who is not emotionally mature? Does that mean we can't have a marriage?
That's that's sort of a disappointing reality, that there's no guarantee that marriages are going to work. Certainly the divorce statistics tell us that. What is our respective commitment to making it work? And we talk about marriage vows. We talk about marriage as a commitment. Dr. You and I were talking about earlier that the culture of no-fault divorce.
Yes.
Divorce made easy. It shouldn't be easy. It should be a struggle to break a vow, to break a commitment. And it should only come after concerted effort. And as we committed ourselves to each other, and that commitment is, what we call it, a covenant. What is a covenant? It's not just transactional. It goes back to the river and the kettle and the bird. Right? It's not just as long as I'm getting what I want, I'm in. And the moment I'm not getting what I want, I'm out. It's we are invested in one another. And we want to make it work. If we don't enter into the marriage with that mindset, and if we don't preserve that mindset, then we've got a problem before we start. Now, are there, can there be mental illness? Can there be physical illness? Certainly, I know my mother in the last years of my father's life, she was devoted to taking care of him as he slipped into Alzheimer's and dementia and Parkinson's. That's not what she signed up for. Well, yeah, actually it is, because when you get into your 80s, this is part of life. And she was devoted to him, even when he no longer knew who she was. You could make the case, listen, he's not there anymore. Didn't matter. She continued to be devoted to him. And as long as we are committed to do the work, to make it work, then there's something to work with. If one party checks out in some way, because I'm no longer interested in putting in what it takes, now the other partner's got a serious problem.
Well, let me bring up the thing that's been the elephant in the room for me. What if we have an abusive partner? And I don't know, Claire, if that was a part of any of your interviews, because I know some couples have had abuse within the relationship and come back from it. And I know most who have not. What has been your experience when abuse is a part of a partnership?
I did not speak with anyone who had that, although there were several that had very difficult first marriages. And in general, the way that they talked about them was that they had growing up to do, to learn what you can tolerate and what you can't. But also that going it alone was a mistake. In a couple cases, I can think of people who talked about that their marriage broke up It was very, very contentious. There was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of hurt. And in retrospect, they should have gotten help earlier. By the time they got to it, the house was burnt down. You know what I mean? I mean, metaphorically. So, you know, I think that there's, as much as the book relies on the wisdom of real people, there is a chapter called For Worse where they talk about that, you know, a lot of these happy couples have gotten professional help. And there's a reason for that, because we all get to a point where there are things that we can't handle. And I think that would be how I would answer, you know, that's like, there's just some things that you have to recognize you can't handle on your own. And I think abuse would definitely be one of them.
See, I think we have an obligation to our partner to become the best version of ourselves, to be as mature and loving, to know ourselves, what we can, as you put it so lovingly, what we can tolerate or not, in ourselves and in someone else. You know, I think that is just absolute key. It's interesting. And how not to become nothing because the other person takes up more than their share of the oxygen in the relationship. Yeah. And that's a mistake a lot of people have done. They shrink. And the ethics, is it ethical, Rabbi, to stay in a very abusive marriage?
I would say, unless there's evidence that the partner is willing to try to change, then no. To accept and receive abuse, I don't think is really ethically much different from inflicting abuse.
I agree. And I think the courts are even understanding that too, that if someone stays in an abusive household, that maybe even the children won't be staying in that household. Maybe they'll find another place for them, because that's a form of abuse. And yet people get so torn down. I think there are a lot of places they can go. They can talk to a rabbi. They can talk to an amazing author who's a TV producer.
Or a shrink.
Or a shrink. They can talk to a chaplain. I think the hesitance.
A good friend.
A good friend. And the problem is, as a good friend, I think many friends fuel the fire. Oh, no, he didn't do that, and how awful. I think a good friend tries to support the relationship and doesn't try and make it worse. And I think that's something that was clear. I love the language that you used and that your couples used in your chapters. It was really lovely. I think it should be a manual that everyone who's in a couple or wants to be part of a couple should read. I think it should be a signed reading.
You know, that's an important point, that we go into marriage with this assumption that it's just going to be easy and natural, and then of course you add parenting to it. You know, why in the world would anybody think this is something we can just wing it and get it right? So, you know, it's to your credit, to Claire, that you've provided this as a tremendous resource.
Absolutely. And I really do urge everyone to read the book. I think it's just wonderful. It's, you know, the issue of making marriage happy, hard-won wisdom from real couples by Claire Vande Polder. And I think it's delightful. Rabbi, I think we've come to the word of the day, sir.
Ah, yes. Yeah. And for the word of the day, don't go looking in your dictionaries. I don't expect you're going to find it, because I've made up this week's word of the day. And that word is Semmelweisian. I'll say it again, Semmelweisian. And it comes from Ignaz Semmelweis, who was a Hungarian doctor who became concerned, rightly so, about the number of unexplained infections that were cropping up in his hospital. And he conducted a series of experiments, just tried different things. You know, this is before germ theory. And eventually one of his experiments was he had doctors wash their hands before treating patients. And he found a correlation. He couldn't explain it. Nobody could, but he said, this seems to have an effect. We should start washing our hands. He met with so much resistance by his colleagues. They eventually claimed that he had suffered a nervous breakdown. It's not clear historically whether he did or not. And they put him in an insane asylum. Oh. And he died, I think, 2 weeks later with some evidence that he'd been abused there.
Oh.
And of course, it was quite some time later when I think it was Joseph Lister who really was the one who really popularized and mainstreamed this idea of germ theory. But, you know, we talk about cancel culture. I mean, he was really canceled because he had a suggestion that went against the conventional wisdom that nobody wanted to believe, didn't fit in with their worldview. And to be ethical, we have to be open to possibilities that may seem wacky. At least give them the chance to find out whether there might be something to them. And in our relationships, sometimes, and I mean, certainly in marriage, I mean, sometimes I just wonder what is going through my wife's mind. And I know she wonders that about me. Yes. And it's that willingness to, you know, accommodate our quirks, our idiosyncrasies, to communicate and say, could you help me understand exactly what you were thinking? Mm-hmm. That willingness and that openness is what serves us in marriage, serves us in all our relationships, serves us in our communities and in society.
So Claire, along those lines then, before we do the final word of wisdom, I wanted you to address quickly the idea of trying to change your partner, because here we have the Semmelweisian, where no one could just listen to him. We have to stay, no one wanted change or whatever. So please address the issue. And with the rabbi's joke about men and women and their approach to change in marriage, what do you have to say about the notion of trying to change a partner?
I think almost every time I asked a couple, have you ever tried to change something about the other person? The first thing they would do is laugh. Because it's like, of course I did. And of course I failed. And then they could tell you all sorts of ways. A woman talks about how her husband is missing the aesthetic gene and she'd try to buy clothes for him, but he would wear his old clothes and, you know, with a hole in the back and all this other stuff, and just was never able to change that. You know, some people talk about it in a household context, where one person likes everything clean and the other person thinks their version of clean is just fine. And, you know, they're constantly trying to come to terms on how clean is clean enough and how cluttered, what's real clutter. So yeah, this is big things and small things all the time. And it starts to become kind of a well-worn path, I think, with people, that they're like, why are you this way? And they can talk about it, but they no longer try to change whatever this characteristic is. And working to accept it can sometimes be really hard work. And there are just things they live with that they wish they didn't have to, but they understand after a while, it's like, we're not gonna make any progress on this. I've said what I'm gonna say about it. My partner is the way they are, whether they can change it or not. And you just have to accept it. Accepting is, you know, it starts from the beginning and it never, ever ends. And that is something that I actually learned myself, that I kind of still thought maybe it'll get easier, and it does. Now I don't expect it to. I think it's just going to still be something that, you know, next year we're working on different things, and the year after that probably still some of the same things and some new ones. So that's where I think I got a lot of information, and that the couples contributed to just this sense that it starts at the beginning, it never ends. It's going to be big things and little things, and it's just part of the deal. You have to sort of accept that that's part of the deal.
I think that's a great message, because I know that I think after 33 years of marriage, how come we haven't gotten it figured out yet?
Right? I know.
What's wrong with us?
I know.
And to know that everybody's struggling with this, we can be a little easier on ourselves that we're still struggling with it too.
Well, that's what some people have said, is that it's nice to hear people tell the truth about it, because I think, sometimes we kind of want to whitewash. Oh, we're very happy together. And, and it's not polite to ask intrusive questions of other people about, like, what was the last, Rabbi, what was the last fight you had with your wife? We don't do that, but I did that. And so that's where, you hear some honesty, because it's not even that we're trying to whitewash it. It's just that we kind of don't talk about it. We might talk about it with our girlfriends a little bit, but there's this fairy tale that a lot of the, that this is what marriage is supposed to be. And even the kind of more realistic portrayals on TV really can't get, I think, at like the layers and the depth and complexity that this relationship has year after year.
Very good. Doctor, do you have a last word for us?
I do have a last word, 2 last words. The first is, I put in the chat the LinkedIn profile for Claire Vande Polder. I urge everyone, if you're part of a couple, if you want to be a part of a couple, or if you know someone who you love that's part of a couple or wants to be part of a couple, I urge you to read the book, Making Marriage Happy, Hard-Won Wisdom from Real Couples. And my only suggestion of the day is, who are you really, and what do you bring to the table? Instead of asking, what can someone do for me? What can you bring to the people in your life? And don't forget to ask, what are they bringing to you? But ask yourself first, what do you bring? Because a lot of times unhappiness in a relationship, even if it's not that person's fault, as a psychologist, I know one person working hard to make things better can make a difference. And it's not proof that they were the problem. It's just not. So that was my last word. I thank you, Claire Vande Polder and Rabbi.
Thank you,
Claire. Thank you, Doctor.
So nice to be with you both.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. And I know that you've had a lot of joy and a lot of hard work now for people to start diving into. And I know that they can do that. Everyone, we'll see you next week. And we're looking forward to the Rabbi and the Shrink's next episode. Thank you all.